Go ahead and get started. Would you please take roll?
Ms. Atkins? Mr. Hendricks?
Here.
Mrs. McDaniel? Mrs. Peterson? Mr. Stoffer?
Here.
Mr. Wylage?
Here.
Mrs. Sheffel?
Here. Can I get a motion to approve the December 20th, 2021 agenda?
So moved. Second.
Any discussion? Vote, please.
Mr. Hendricks?
Yes.
Mr. Stoffer?
Yes.
Mr. Wylage?
Yes.
Mrs. Sheffel?
Yes. Commendation and good news.
Well, I'll, before we see what Dave has for us, just as we were talking a little bit before during dinner, as Brian brought up, we had our combined high school band and choir concert on Thursday, which was a very nice break of the frustration of Wednesday night and Wednesday through the rest of the week. And so glad we had power at the middle school and we were able to have that concert. It was just so many kids. I mean, it's got to be a good percentage of our high school population involved in our arts programs, and just a great audience and a lot of talent demonstrated by the kids, a lot of variety of talent, and it just was a wonderful evening. Kudos to, of course, all the kids, and all of our choir and band directors just did a fabulous job. So it was a wonderful concert, and it deserves to be commended. Dave?
I would just kind of point out some great things have been happening at the middle school as well. Our middle school leadership group has been picked as the 712 Volunteer Group of the Year, which is a great deal. Nice picture that was tweeted out today by Mrs. Reynolds. Isn't it great? Black squirrel there.
Maybe it's appropriate to mention too. I think it, in a way, is good news. It's easy to talk about the difficulties of Wednesday through Friday, and even actually over the weekend. We weren't entirely back to normal until this afternoon in this building, as far as this room, and actually our buses are still waiting for parts because of the damage they sustained. But you know, it's easy to complain and look on the negative side of that, but it's also appropriate to realize how we probably dodged a bullet. And I don't know of one injury from you know, after we find out that there were tornadoes on the ground, and an abundance of tornadoes if you combine the Nebraska-Iowa region here, to get through all that, and all we had to do was lose a few days of school. Well, so be it. But good news, and really appreciate support from people like our local emergency management folks, Doug Reed, calling and checking on us, and it's a good community, and I think, considering the severity of what it could have been, it's nice to come out as unscathed as we did, and again with no injuries to my knowledge.
Definitely. Anyone else? Okay. Comments and suggestions. This is the first portion or first time during our agenda that anyone in the audience or online, if they want to do a chat, can address the board. Hearing none. We'll go to consent agenda. Can I get a motion to approve?
So moved. Second.
Do we have an updated personnel sheet?
We do. There are additional items in F and G.
Is there any comments, any questions, discussion? Vote please.
Mr. Stoffer?
Yes.
Mr. Rylage?
Yes.
Mr. Hendricks?
Yes.
Mrs. Sheffield?
Yes. Report 6.01 COVID-related updates.
So good news is, I'm always nervous anytime we have extended days along with a weekend where we're not with children, because that means if there are new positive cases, they don't get reported to us, and so usually when we come back together, there's a bit of an influx, and that didn't happen today. So that's good news on a short week with a nice long break ahead of us. So we are still on the low side. I believe last Friday, when we look at our rolling 3-day average, which we did a little different last week because of Thursday and Friday being out, we did Monday through Wednesday. But I think 3 of our 4 buildings were in the 0.4, 0.44, 0.45 range, and 1 building was at 0. And that's maintaining today, that building at 0, and then the rest of them have dropped down just a little bit. So good news to report there. Of course, we're cautious in how we report and how optimistic we get, because we know that can change in a heartbeat. But we are right now very, very similar to what we were at this day last year. We had came off the peak and worked our way down, and we did have we trended up in January, but we never trended back up to the high numbers of the November prior. So we hope that at most that's what we deal with, but we will see. The bigger news, COVID related today, that I sent the board an email about this, I think late in the afternoon. I also sent it to the district. But as you know, the OSHA mandate that they put out, and it was challenged immediately, but they put out a mandate early part of our school year, I believe, saying that employers with 100 or more employees had to require vaccinations by, originally I think it was January 4th was the original date that it was to go into effect. An injunction was filed immediately, and it's been being battled in the courts. It was in the 6th Circuit Court, federal court, and just found out on Friday that they released the injunction. So on Saturday, OSHA jumped back in and re-upped the requirement, reiterating it, and they changed the dates a little bit, and they put some language in there that creates a little bit of leniency, I guess, for lack of a better word. But January 10th is the date when they're saying that all employers should abide by having employees fully vaccinated, and I believe fully vaccinated means 2 shots, not the booster. The lenience is you have until February 9th to put in the alternative, and the alternative is that if somebody doesn't want to get a vaccination, they are to wear a mask at all work hours, and they are to be tested once a week. And we're still looking for absolute guidance on how that testing, as far as from a education perspective, because keep in mind that's a rule for all employers, so we're looking for a little guidance from the DE if we're funding those testing situations, if we're putting testing sites, if you will, up in our district for our employees. Now, having said all that, we've been monitoring that all along. The reason I'm bringing it up now is because it only has one more level to go, and it's already been challenged. I think the Supreme Court's already received 4 challenges on it. The assumption is that the Supreme Court will probably stay the injunction while they review it, but that hasn't happened yet. And so I think why our legal counsel is saying now's the time to notify your employees, let them know that this is potentially coming, because it's at least nearing an end. Where it had to go through the system and the appeals process, now it's at the Supreme Court. When they review it and what the outcome will be, we don't know. So I put a message out that you all were copied on today, just giving our employees a heads up. I thought it was the right thing to do. If somebody is not vaccinated, but they're considering getting vaccinated, and or if they've already had the 1 shot, being out for break may be an opportunity for them. And also to let them know that if they choose not to get a vaccine, what the law will, if it stands, require of a mask and of testing. So had very little questions back from our employees, so I think that they're probably more in tune with understanding this than than maybe one would think. I thought maybe it would be news to many, but I really didn't get many questions back. So we're going to monitor that and watch that. What I said to our employees was we'll see what happens even today or tomorrow if any news comes out. If not, we'll monitor it over the break. If we get back in January and there is no stay on the injunction, and we're still marching toward January 10th, then I think our first step is we will start the data collection process to figure out what employees have the vaccination, and then start informing those who do not of what the alternative is. And I honestly have no idea on, we didn't, I mean, by law, we didn't keep track of who was vaccinated. Now that's a little different. But I always felt when we were working with Pot County that we were maybe somewhere around the 60% range. But I don't know if we were ever scientific in thinking that. Andrea, I don't know if, I think based that on the number of people we knew were signing up and that we were sending over to Pot County to be registered. So we'll see what happens, but again, not a lot of questions about it, but that is some new and big news. I think a lot of people thought maybe the 6th Circuit would turn it over, but they sided with OSHA, and they relieved the injunction. So for the time being, so we'll monitor it and see what happens. But that's what's going on the COVID front. Other than watching the horizon and seeing what else happens. In the meantime, we're plugging along, and after tomorrow, we'll be halfway through another school year. So,
Is there any questions? All right. 6.02 Iowa School Performance Profile Data.
ask Dave to step up to the spotlight a little bit tonight and give us some overarching analyses of the data we've received.
Okay, it's that time of year. Usually in December, the Iowa school performance profiles are released, and they have been. I was also kind of hoping it'd come a little quicker, a little earlier, because they've done it a couple of times now. But yeah, I did include this presentation in email to you earlier tonight, so you're welcome to look at it at your leisure later. I also included the link to the Iowa School Performance Profile website there. You can, on that site, look up any school, district, or building in the state and see data from the 2018, 2019, and 2021 Iowa school or ISASP results, and then in 2020, during the throes of COVID, when there was no ISASP testing, no Iowa assessment testing, there were still a few things that they could measure, and so they included them. I'm going to show you tonight is kind of an overarching look at those data that have been released. But I want you to keep it in perspective. So first thing I'd like to remind you of is our mission and vision statement, that it doesn't say we're going to do the absolute best we can on test scores in our mission statement. We do expect our test scores to be good, but they're not the most important thing for kids. And so just a reminder about that. And also that we have a lot of core values that we've been trying to espouse here at LC that really are taking hold and do reflect in a lot of ways what we're really about here in the district, while we try to inspire excellence in everything that we do, adults and students alike. We also do have district goals, and we're moving through a SIAC process right now to refresh these goals. The first goal about focusing on accelerating growth and closing the achievement gaps for, especially for free reduced lunch students and for students on IEPs, is at kind of the heart of what you'll see tonight in terms of the data. But it's more than that. It's also data that looks at the well-being of students. And there are lots and lots of indicators, other measures that aren't necessarily part of the index to rate schools that are all part of the Iowa School Performance Profiles that I'd encourage you to look at. Statewide, they've made a number of changes in the way that the indexes are put together. In the end, the ESSA law requires that states rank schools. So Iowa has taken an approach that kind of puts school buildings into categories, from a priority school building, meaning about the bottom 5% of the school buildings in the state, to exceptional. And these are the percentages of schools that fell into those categories in terms of the overall index from the results from last year. The entire distribution of schools in Iowa has sunk down a little bit, and that's not a surprise. The pandemic has certainly played a significant role in lots of things in the lives of kids and teachers today. Being out of school for 3 months made a big difference. Lots of achievement gaps exist today that would not have been in play had there not been a pandemic. So you'll notice that there are a couple percentage points more priority schools, schools who aren't succeeding, and fewer schools in the top two in the exceptional and high-performing categories. So as we talk about the data tonight, I'll show you some of the things that where our schools fit into these. Overall, we're doing fairly well, but we have one school that moved a category. And we'll talk about that here a little bit. One of the things they did change was they fundamentally shifted the way that the index is calculated. Now, what that really means is that from 2019 to 2021 uses a whole different formula to figure out what your index score is. So, in my opinion, we need to be cautious when we start comparing the scores. For example, when you talk about growth, it was a very large factor in determining your index score in 2019, and it is considerably less of a factor in considering your score after 2021. Notice the elementaries, it was more than 50% of the index score was related to growth. And now that is considerably less, about 36% of the score can be attributed to growth. So in other words, the caution here is looking at the scores in isolation is probably a better thing than looking at the scores in terms of trends. However, I'm going to show you some trend data, right? Just take it with a grain of salt because the rules are changing, and the rules did significantly change between 2019 and 2021 in terms of the calculation of the index score, okay? You'll also notice there are some things that are part of the index score that were not part of the index score before. And for example, progress toward the English language proficiency scores at the district level are now 10% of the score for high schools, and they weren't included at all in prior years. And the post-secondary readiness composite is also still in the score, but it has been broken out into 4 different pieces, different components, and I'll share about that here in a little bit. So how'd we do? This is from the front page of the district page for the Iowa School Performance website. Notice that the yellow kind of describes where the overall ESSA designations are. There were no changes in ESSA designations for any school this year. Everything from 2019 was carried forward into 2020 and has been carried forward into 2021. So where we had a targeted school, targeted year 1 for Titan Hill, they remain targeted year 1 regardless of how they scored this year. Same with middle school, they were targeted year 2 2 years ago, and because the state just determined to hold those data forward because of the effects of the pandemic, there's been no change in those. The changes are as follows. The high school has moved from a high-performing category school to a commendable category school. Their overall index score dropped from 65.01 to 59.72. And then each of the other schools did decline slightly in terms of their index score. And you have to remember an index score is like the one number collapsing all kinds of information to describe where you fit in line in Iowa. And that's what that is. The index score doesn't apply to the district, which is kind of an interesting thing. ESSA does nothing in ESSA requires the Department of Education to rank districts. It only requires the Department of Education to rank school buildings. This, however, is a look at our district-wide data. And the reason I'm sharing this particular, and I apologize, it's lots and lots of information on one page. But there are some pieces of it that kind of help you see in a quick glance, kind of, so what are we doing better than average? Where are we about average? And where might we fall below the average? And so on the horizontal bars, the bar represents our achievement, and the number on the far right represents our achievement. The dot in that bar represents the state's average. So you can plainly see, for example, the conditions for learning composite. As a district, we fell below the state's average. Whereas when you look down at growth in English language arts and in math, we fell above the state average. So this gives you a little bit of comparison about where, as a whole district, we live in terms of how we compare. You'll also notice on the descriptions on the left, post-secondary readiness index is what was one score has been broken out into 4 pieces. And I can talk about that if you have questions about that later. Okay. So how do our buildings do? As I said before, the high school actually moved from high-performing category to the commendable category. Is still a very good score. It was down from 2 years ago. This is the data from this year for each of the measures that are included as part of the index score. And index scores are kind of funky things. What do they really mean? You know, they're a composite. There are lots of things kind of fit together to give you the ability to kind of compare things. This is a look at what we were in 2019 compared to what we are now. I would highlight probably at the high school the biggest impact on our drop-in score has to do with growth in math and growth in English language arts and proficiency in math, proficiency in language arts. As you might recall, 2 years ago, we had a tremendous junior class. We had multiple National Merit Scholarship finalists, lots of very talented kids, and honestly, our percent proficient were very high. It was a peak at that time, and those scores being lower 2 years later with the freshman class is something we predicted would happen, and indeed it did. Our percentages are still very good. I don't mean to say that they're not. I'm saying it impacted our index score enough to move us down a category. Another interesting thing to think about, though, is 59.72 is at the very top of the commendable category. 60.6 is the bottom of the high-performing category. So they were very close to maintaining their overall rating, but didn't quite make it. Okay. In addition to the overall look at the school, one of the things that we have to pay attention to, and this relates directly to our SAC goal of closing the achievement gaps, is look at the subgroup achievement differences. This year, they calculated this completely differently than they have in the past. It's based on an index score for the entire subgroup across all categories. So they take all of the pieces that were part of what made up the high school score, and they look at it just in terms of free reduced lunch kids, or just in terms of Hispanic students, or just in terms of IEP students. And if there are enough students in that grouping, that category, then we're held accountable for it, okay? And the state average for the index scores of the subgroups was 54.7. They have that in a calculated gap score that if you're below that calculated gap score, that's what will determine whether or not you become a targeted assistance school. Now, had we not carried forward the ESSA designations from 2019 for this year, our high school would have been determined to be a targeted assistance school because of the student achievement gap in the index score for IEP level students. Okay? So in other words, we still have things to work on. Their scores are very good, okay? Our growth scores are very good. They're less than they were 2 years ago, but we do have a deficiency in terms of the gap from our IEP level students at the high school. When we look at the middle school scores have been more consistent in terms of the index. And I think that, I find that remarkable, actually. Our growth at the middle school has been very good. Our growth at Titan Hill has been very good. We see that in iReady scores as well as ISASP scores. We've scored higher than we did in 2018 at the middle school, which is great, right? We still are a targeted year 2 school because of it being carried forward. And our index score is slightly less than it was 2 years ago. When you look at our overall distribution, this is where they are and where the changes occurred. You notice that the growth scores are less than they were 2 years ago, but the proficiency, especially proficiency in English language arts, is very nearly what it was 2 years ago, prior to the pandemic. Our growth at the middle school and our proficiency in the middle school, even with the pandemic effects, has been very, very good. Notice their score of 56.71, and again, they were rated as a commendable school, and 60.60 is the lowest cut score for the high-performing category. Again, the index score for our free reduced lunch students is lower, considerably lower than state average, and in fact lower than the gap cut score. So if we're held to this, then we would continue to be on the targeted list because of the achievement of the free reduced lunch students. Titan Hill, very similar to the middle school in that the targeted assistance was held forward. They were a level first year targeted assistance school in 2019, and so they maintain that status now. The index score, overall index score, is slightly lower than it was 2 years ago. You notice it's 10 points lower than it was 3 years ago. A couple more things to think about with that. In 2018, we used the paper and pencil Iowa assessments. In 2019, we went to the online or computerized ISASP assessment, so it was a completely different assessment between those 2 years. And then between the middle column and the column for this year, they changed all the indexing calculations again. So again, with caution, would we look and say we're getting better or worse using these numbers? It's really 3 pretty independent scores. And this is where we were 2 years ago and where we are in terms of percent proficient and growth, etc. Much like the other schools. You won't see CREFT data because all of CREFT's data is inherited from Titan Hill. So their data and Titan Hill's data, as far as the state is concerned, are identical. Because every student from CREFT feeds into Titan Hill. So therefore, Titan Hill's data is CREFT's data. Okay? There are some slight wrinkles with that when you talk about some of the conditions for learning survey parent results and the like. But because we don't test students below 3rd grade with the ISASP, the index score is not calculated independently for schools that don't deliver the ISASP. Okay? Again, when you look at the differences in scores, it's the same subgroup that's given us fits. It's the low socioeconomic and IEP students. And in fact, IEP students were below the gap cut score for index, so they would be, again, maintained on the list for ESSER targeted. Okay. So there you go. There's an overall look at where we are with the index scores. I would encourage you to dig in. There are lots and lots more data inside the Iowa School Performance Profile that you can poke around in and learn a lot about the district and other districts that you can find, again, any district in Iowa, any school building in Iowa, they're all part of what's been published.
I just make a few comments. First of all, thanks, Dave. Thanks to Dave for, it's wonderful to have a resident statistician who really helps everybody, I think district-wide with interpreting data and determining some things. But I don't think we can stress enough, that was very factual, all that Dave said, and I don't want any of this to sound like an excuse, but you can't stress enough. It's so easy to look at scores from one year to another year and to realize, and to not realize that you can't think longitudinally for many reasons that Dave pointed out. Also, we're talking about different kids from year to year. So, you know, when you look at a year 3 years ago that shows a 62 and you know, it's 10 points different 3 years later, that there are so many factors when you're looking at individual scores of kids and factoring them in. Actually, that 52 or whatever it was could represent greater achievement than the 62, depending where those kids were the year before, you know, how far in the basement or however you want to analyze it. So you really have to be careful with that, because I think that's the first thing people glue their eyes to is like, oh, those numbers went down. And it's not always telling. The other thing I wanted to mention is, you know, we openly talk about the gaps that are inside of student achievement, not only in our school, but all schools wrestle with this. And again, it's not an excuse, but you know, we live in a country where we educate all kids. We educate kids in poverty. We educate kids with special needs. And yet we get compared oftentimes to countries that barely have poverty, and based on something called the PISA, an international exam that's supposed to compare countries. But bottom line is there's so much good information in all this, but you have to normalize the data to really get a picture. And you can't really, in my opinion, get a snapshot of the quality of a school, even though this would say our quality is very high. Based on all that Dave just showed. But I just think there are things that we obviously have to continue. We're proud that we educate all kids in our school system, but we have to continue to find out how to get beyond the barriers of poverty that have obviously a huge impact on how kids succeed. And same with kids that come to us with special needs and such. But just some things I think added to keep in mind when we look at these numbers, and especially realizing that we're not seeing things longitudinally when we see those variances.
The principals also have this presentation. They have access to everything that I showed you tonight. If you have any questions at all later while you're looking through things, don't hesitate to ask, or shoot a question to a principal. Absolutely.
Okay. Is there any questions? Thank you, Dave. All right, we'll go to our discussion items. 7.01 SBRC exhibits approval.
So I'll set this up and then turn it over to Andrea to share the exhibits that were provided to you. But the School Budget Review Committee started a new rule this year that kind of came out of nowhere, right? I haven't been around all that long, but it wasn't something I heard being talked about. But the new rule basically says that at the end of each fiscal year, if your categorical balances are greater than your regular program balances, they want you to come before them and speak to what's going on. And you know, I call this kind of a serendipitous thing, but when I came to LC, I had the honor of hiring Andrea, who quickly got a beat on the fact that we had been doing, in some ways, some planned deficit spending that created some challenges with our budget going forward. But that was recognized right away, and she and I talked often about the plan to right the ship, and we did a good job with that the first year, and then COVID hit, and it kind of put the brakes on it a little bit. But and I think also want to say this, because Andrea probably wouldn't, she's already talked to the SBRC and has already kind of explained to them where we're at, and I think they've said back to us in so many words that this is a new formality. The reality of it is, if it was around a few years ago, the district would have been going before the SBRC as well. So before we go in January, we have to publicly bring this information to the board. So I think that maybe sets it up for you, Andrea, to take it from there.
Yes, so I have included all of the exhibits that we will be taking to the SBRC. So there is an overview narrative of our finances for the past few years and going forward. We also have categorical spending plans are included. There's narratives and projections as well. And then our 5-year unspent authorized budget projections. You'll see 5 years prior and 5 years going forward. And included are the assumptions when taking these projections into consideration. So we will take these to the SBRC on January 25th and give them our fiscal updates.
So the exhibits is what you will be presenting.
Correct. We
To
will
the
actually submit them
SB.
to them prior to them, so they will have them, and then we will also go and give them the fiscal update with these exhibits.
Okay. So do we have to have a public hearing or anything with the community? Just
Nope, just
present to
the-
here, we'll vote on it and,
Correct.
okay.
Correct. It is just us going to the SBRC to give a fiscal update, so it's just you guys approving the exhibits. This is like the same formality of us asking for modified supplemental allowable growth and things like that, like dropout prevention.
Okay.
But we are not actually making any requests to the SBRC. It is just a fiscal update.
Does anyone else have any questions, or is there any discussion? And do you have to go, is this in Des Moines? Do you?
Yes, so it'll actually be myself and Dr. Knos that will go to the SBRC.
Okay. Is everyone all right with the exhibits as presented? Any questions? Are we okay to move on to 7.02? Okay. Bob or Brian, do you have anything? All right. We'll go on then to 7.02, Superintendent Search Survey results. Mr. Black, we'll let you go ahead and present the surveys,
Okay.
or the results for the survey.
What I put together for you is a look that looks at our superintendent stakeholder survey for this year and compared it a little bit to some data from the stakeholder survey from 3 years ago to give you a little bit of an idea of kind of where the community has seen the most value in terms of qualification for a new superintendent. Again, I always want to remind us that we're really all in this together as a community, that inspiring excellence and helping kids really succeed to make a strong difference in the lives of their community is what we're all about. And having a leader that really does exemplify those attributes of our mission, vision, and core values is important part of this whole dialogue. So this is the results, and you have a copy of the actual survey results that Dr. Grinmeyer sent to us. This is a look at the participation, how many responses did we get. We actually did get 180 more responses this year than we did in 2018. And interestingly, the distribution was mostly the additions were mostly from the community. From parents, from community members, from folks who didn't identify themselves as a student or a school employee of some sort. And that was one of the things that you wanted. Back before we administered the survey, you talked about the need for us to get a stronger voice from the community, that it seemed like a lot of students and not enough from the community. And the new data does reflect a stronger voice from the community, from parents and the community. Okay. In 2018, there were several strengths that were identified by the group then, and in 2021, some of the same kinds of things came out in the data. School pride and our programming for activities, and the idea that relationships are at the heart of how we make things work around here were common from both surveys. An interesting strength that I would note is that communication has become a strength. I can't recall how many years we went with communication on the list of things that we wanted to do better at. And now our community, whether that's students, parents, teachers, etc., are starting to say, you know what, we like how you communicate. And so that idea of having a strong communicator as part of what the community would expect, I think is coming out of what they see as one of our strengths as a system, right? Another interesting observation I would say about this particular list is that it probably is affected by the pandemic. Student behaviors, you'll see come up later on as a challenge as well. And so the idea of positive student behaviors coming forward to me meant there's something that's happening, that we need to recognize through this voice in terms of student behavior. We still have troublesome student behavior, but guess what? Our community is also saying, you know what? We've got a pretty good culture around here in terms of student behavior too. So that's an interesting phenomenon. And then quality and dedicated teachers, we, in the last year and a half, 2 years, year and 3 quarters, I'll say that much, since the pandemic began, we've had to rely upon the hearts and minds of our teachers in ways we never thought we would, right? And it certainly is coming out as one of the strengths that our community recognizes, that we have dedicated, quality people who work in our system, okay? So those are our strengths, and I did highlight a few of those in bold that were common between the two lists. Feel free to interrupt me at any time, too, if you want. In 2018, our challenges You know, the idea of bullying, harassment, student disruption, it was loud and clear as one of the things that were frustrating, whether it be from staff or parents alike. We also, you know, we do pretty well at graduation rates, but they were also interested in expanding that definition a little bit, getting more after what college readiness really is about. And so there was this programming thing. I think it was interesting also the idea of thinking about the well-being of our students. If you recall, we were talking a lot about student well-being. We had put into place the programming through the Heartland Family Service partnership with the Iowa West Foundation, and getting more therapeutic services into our system was important. We were also in the throes of building projects, right? Finishing up some, starting others. So the idea of continuing with that narrative of continuing to invest and do what's right for our facilities came out as one of the things at that time that they didn't want the ball to be dropped upon, right? Continuity between buildings, curriculum, and communication was also a challenge, right? Now in 2021, we're hearing some of the same kinds of things in terms of challenges. There's some new words: vaping, drugs, bullying in terms of student behaviors, not just bullying and student disruption, but a broader definition of that. There was some comment about, you know, golly, we've got some great sports things happening, but is it overwhelming? You know, is it out of balance? And those kinds of things were part of the narrative. Cohesion between buildings and continuity between buildings seems to me like a lot of the same kinds of thing. When a student transitions from one building to another, and we have one more transition than lots of places have, how are we handling that? And that came out in terms both from parents and staff. The consistency issues. And then retaining quality staff, I think, is one I'm not surprised that came out, especially because we've had problems hiring bus drivers and paraprofessionals and any classified staff. And in fact, our certified staff pools are greatly diminished. Finding high quality teachers and just people to work with students is becoming harder and harder. It's also not a problem unique to us. We know that. There are some common threads between the 2 years. I would say that the coordination and cohesion between the buildings was one thing. Student behaviors was another, and consistent instructional strategy across buildings is another. And that was primarily a teacher voice from the teacher side, right? When we looked at qualifications or personal traits, our survey 2 years ago took qualifications and personal traits and had two different questions that dealt with it. What I did was collapse those into one, and I used the highest rated answers from both of them to be part of this one question. And I did that because this year we didn't ask those separately. They were combined with the standards, and so some of them were remarkably alike, right? And so this gives you a little bit of an idea then of how the community looked at qualifications in terms of the standards that they felt to be important. Approachable, accessible, welcoming on both as the top item. And I have to say that that's also a strength of Dr. Knost, and it came out loud and clear in the data as a strength of the district, right? That his effects on our system have been profound in that regard. We asked for it, we got it, and now we want to keep it, right? As in terms of a qualification. Strong instructional leader was also on both lists. Brings out success in others, the idea of building on human capital, a very important aspect of both years, and building partnership with the school and community. Relationships, a very, very strong desire to have that kind of thing as part of what we see in leadership. Promotes community of care and support for students, couples very well with our core beliefs, our core values, and with our SIAC goals. The idea of trauma-sensitive school, the efforts we're trying to do in terms of PBS, et cetera, all move toward well-being of students and staff, and that came out loud and clear in terms of what our stakeholders are asking of their next superintendent. And then that last one is, it's an effect of the times. The idea that if we can get people in the door and we can keep them, that provides stability for our system in ways that is very positive. And that also came out in the language. Okay. In addition, one of the things that Grunmeyer asked was a question that was, so what advice might you give the superintendent, right? And I tried to just pull out of the statements some of the highlights. There was a lot of emphasis on relationships, on communication, on being transparent, honest, caring, those attributes of a servant leader, if you will, very clearly in the language that people used when they answered this kind of question. So there you go. Did I capture it?
You did, very well. I would like to see if we can get the actual report. Can we put that on the website, so?
Yes, I will
people
make
can
sure
see
that,
it?
that we
Okay.
get that posted on the website.
Okay,
And you have a copy in your board packet of the actual report this time as
correct,
well.
correct.
And we can also include this presentation on there,
Okay,
and that won't be any problem at all.
exactly. Well, this way they can see the numbers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Everyone, the students we had, the community that we had, everyone who had taken the time, and we appreciate that because even though the board is we're the ones that make the ultimate decision, we need to hear from the stakeholders. And so this is important. And I did ask the board members to let me know what their top qualifications were, the key qualifications from this report. And the one was that, 7 board members, they listed being visible, which is the top one on the key qualifications. Be approachable, accessible, and welcoming. And all 7 board members had stated that. 5 board members listed good open communication. 3 board members listed recruit staff and retain staff. And 3 board members listed strong instructional leader, build school and community. I mean, every one of those is what. So I think the survey shows that there's not something glaring out there that the board isn't in tune. We're all on the same page. And so I think that's one thing that I see from the survey. And does anyone else want to have do you have any comments on reactions from the board members? Is there anything that anyone wants to say? Because basically, right now, what we need to do is give Grunmeyer Services the direction, the top 3, 4 qualifications, because they will use that in screening applicants, as they call, and they get feedback about the people applying for this position.
I think these are all the outwardly, things that people see. I think one of the things that I think is easily, not represented is kind of the topic that we had just before this, just the financial understanding and ensuring that the district is always in good standings, and, you know, as you think about balance sheets and the costs of running the actual district. So, you know, those elements still need to be, you know, key items. I don't know if they're personal traits, but it's, maybe that speaks to experience and I guess breadth of their career, so.
Right. And that was, you know, with the board members, with what was sent to me is like, you know, at least one board member mentioned, you know, building teams to meeting the needs of students, financial facility management, honest, good work ethic, experience, and even understand LC mission, vision, and core values. And truthfully, I'm the one that put that one, because I think if we have someone who understands, a lot of this comes underneath that. And there are other things too, being a superintendent, then going out and meeting the school bus and, you know, meeting the kids. Not that we don't want that, because we've had a taste of that, and we want to see our leader out and meeting the students and not just in the office. And I guess what we need to do as a board, decide on the direction we want to give Trent Grunmeyer with the results from this survey. I think everyone, you know, the visibility, approachable, accessible, and welcoming, I think that's won everyone. It was the top of the survey and something that every school board member mentioned.
We have a few board members who are not with us
Correct.
physically here tonight, but are watching through the stream, and I told them all that they could text if they had any
Good.
input, and Ms. Peterson just sent me a text that she wanted to second what Brian was saying about the importance of the fiscal responsibility piece.
Yeah, I guess the only thing that sort of surprised me is when I look at what those key qualification words are, I don't see the communication part of it jump out as one of the things. But when I listen to stakeholders and see the way things have been over the last couple of years, that's one of the things that have been one of the strong points of our suit. So I was really surprised that that didn't come out as something, I guess, more defined, that communication was an important part of it, is a more defined topic than
It did
sort
come
of
out-
blended in how some of these soft words are.
Yeah, it did come out in the qualitative data, in the what advice would you give kind of thing, where people had a chance to write things. It didn't surface, you're correct though, when it was one of the things I had to choose.
Right.
And that's something to remember too. As Trent and I have talked about this whole survey, it's not meant to be a scientific survey, right? And so just remembering that, what we can glean from it, probably, there are some strong things to glean out of the narrative, the story that's told, as opposed to the hard numbers, right?
Yeah, I kind of put the communication style focus in my feedback was really in terms of transparency. What's going on with the district, the type of communication, the open-mindedness, the open forum kind of communication, I think, which is critical. I still think that, you know, as I think about the personal traits, you can have folks that index really well in different areas, whether it is communication style, whether it is, you know, financial, district management kind of elements, whether that is, you know, selecting of staffing and those kinds of things. And then there is the focus on developing the educational programs. I mean, all those are different components. And I think, you know, as I look at it and what we have seen through the last 8 years at least, there's definitely different styles that have different strengths and weaknesses in every component. But I think what we're looking for going forward, at least in my mind, is that transparency. And then also, I mean, there's no denying that our facilities are largely upgraded. And now we're into a maintenance model and we've got to be very mindful of how we spend our money, and those kinds of things. So it's going to be a little bit of a different kind of leader, I think, that we are looking for there in terms of the balance. And no doubt about it, we have seen the district, I would say, you know, kind of rejuvenate with the style that Dr. Knost has brought in terms of the communication and how we engage as a district with each other. And I don't think that we want to go any steps backwards in that. So that's going to be really a kind of I think we're looking for I don't want to say a unicorn, but we're looking for something that is definitely going to be very difficult to find all those traits in one individual. So.
And that's where our job will be, is to, when we interview and things. So I'm looking at like being visible, the approachable, accessible, welcoming, someone good at communication, keeping transparency, lines open, financial, facility management, someone who understands, I guess, I would think that superintendent with experience would have that, where they have to deal with all the budgets and everything, especially with our keeping our facilities maintained.
Yep.
And so we can actually put that in there too. So that would give us 3 to focus on. Not to say that, I mean, there's 10 standards now for evaluating a superintendent. If we can find someone that can just meet all 10 standards, 100%, we're good.
Unicorn.
Yeah. But is there another area that we need to have Trent focus on that you see? I mentioned the 3. Because we can give him just this. I mean, he sees how the stakeholders, you know, are looking at things. This is just from the board's perspective. I'm one that understand LC mission, vision, and core values, because that's what we keep coming back to. And, I mean, that's what we're striving for, is to meet all of those. And I think that includes, recruiting and finding staff and teachers, and to hire them, support them, develop them. I think that's important too. So do we want to add that in? Do we want to add, what else do we need to?
What ones do you have right now?
We have the, is approachable, accessible, and welcoming. The good open communication, the transparency, keep the lines open, and then the financial facility management, that's something that, you know, people don't see, but as a board, we see that. Because we can just give them those and,
Yeah, the one thing I
And they
don't know if
can-
that comes through in that is, probably toot Dr. Knos horn here a little bit, is somebody that is, brings the district together, the staff, as well as the parents and students. I mean, a cohesion, I don't know how the heck you word that. I don't know if that's
Well-
inclusive, I don't know what the right words there
well,
are.
and it could be, you know, build school and community relations, you know, because that's what is, you know,
Yeah.
I had said something about demonstrating the ability to build a team focused on meeting the needs of the students, staff, and community.
Yep.
Because I think that's one of the things that we have to have a leader that can engage and bring all those groups together, because, you know, that's one of the places where you can get a lot of mileage for
Yeah.
some of the things by engaging those. And I think there's, you know, some fruit out there that, you know, we can continue to work toward harvesting if,
Yeah, it's
if we're
continuing
engaging
the
that
bonds
community.
that have been kind of created, and I know that that's not the right word, but
well, the relationships. I mean, we
Yeah.
need someone who can build the relationships
Yep.
to bring them together, and then that would probably go back to, one of our challenges is, you know, consistent instructional strategies and cohesion among buildings. I mean,
Yep.
that's the type of leader that, you know, if
Yep.
they're building relationships and seeing, we go from one building to another to grow and build on that. Well, that would give us 4. Daryl, we haven't heard anything from you. I know it.
I already put down my
Yeah.
list. It's already there.
So everyone, we can give them that information. And this isn't just okay, only these 4 things. It's just that this is the, I guess, the board coming together and saying, yes, we agree with the stakeholders, and we're also looking for a leader who can look at their experience, the applicant's experience, to see if they'll fit in, be a good fit for Lewis Central.
Even though effectively managing district resource didn't make the cut this time, it's not that it's not important, right? And so you're injecting that into part of what Dr. Grunmeyer can use, makes perfect sense.
Right. Right. And the one thing I'd like to point out, they do have the diagram. This, 3 years ago, our diagram, the middle part was, what was that? It was district. And,
I think I have it over there.
yeah, I do too. But it was district. And with all the words and everything that they had on the survey, and this time it's student. And I thought that's a big, eye-opener. I mean, it was
Telling.
just, I noticed that right away.
It's telling.
Okay, I think, everyone good with that? All right, thank you, Dave, appreciate it. And,
okay, I just thought of the word now, sorry.
what's the word?
Relatable.
Relatable, got it. Well,
Whether it
relationship,
is student, parent, district staff, teacher, the ability to build a relationship at all those levels.
okay,
That's my opinion. I'm just one of 7.
absolutely. Okay,
we're one of 4 tonight.
I will share that with Trent tomorrow then. We'll go on to our discussion item 7.03, late filed open enrollment requests. And actually, by Iowa law, It is Iowa Code 21.51A. Closed session is appropriate to review or discuss records which are required or authorized by state or federal law to be kept confidential. So with that, can I get a motion to go into closed session?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Vote, please.
Mr. Wylage? Yes. Mr. Hendricks?
Yes.
Mr. Stoffer?
Yes.
Mrs. Shuffle?
Yes. are back out of closed session. We went ahead, we had 7.03 late filed open enroll request, and then we came out of closed session and voted right away to go back into closed session for 7.04 employee request for other paid or unpaid leave, which is allowable by Iowa Code 21.51A. So with those discussion items out of the way, we are now at our agenda, comments and suggestions. This is the second time during our agenda that anyone can address the board. All right, we'll go on. Hearing none, we'll go on to action items. 9.01 SBRC application.
Madam Chairwoman,
Mr. Hendricks.
I'd like to make a motion the board approve the exhibits for the required appearance at the SBRC hearing on January 25th, 2022, as presented.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and second. Any discussion? Vote, please.
Mr. Hendricks,
Yes.
Mr. Stoffer,
Yes.
Mr. Wyledge,
Yes.
Mrs. Shuffle.
Yes. 9.02 Superintendent Search Survey Results.
Madam Chairwoman,
Mr. Hendricks.
I'd like to make a motion that the board approve the superintendent's search survey results as presented.
Second.
Any discussion? And the top 4 that we discussed during it, I'll send that on to Trent Grenmeyer. Vote, please.
Mr. Stoffer,
Yes.
Mr. Wyledge,
Yes.
Mr. Hendricks,
Yes.
Mrs. Shuffle.
Yes. 9.03 late filed open enrollment requests, and we will have 4 motions.
Madam Chairwoman,
Mr. Hendricks.
I'd like to make a motion that the board deny the open enrollment request for student A as presented in closed session.
Second.
Any discussion? Vote, please.
Mr. Wyledge,
Yes.
Mr. Hendricks,
Yes.
Mr. Stoffer,
Yes.
Mrs. Shuffle.
Yes. I need a motion for
Madam
student B.
Chairwoman,
Mr. Hendricks.
I'd like to make a motion to deny the open enrollment request for student B as presented in closed session.
Second.
Any discussion? Vote, please.
Mr. Hendricks,
Yes.
Mr. Stoffer,
Yes.
Mr. Wyledge,
Yes.
Mrs. Shuffle.
Yes. Student C.
I'd like to make a motion to deny the open enrollment request for student C as presented in closed session.
Second.
Any discussion? Vote, please.
Mr. Stoffer,
Yes.
Mr. Wyledge,
Yes.
Mr. Hendricks,
Yes.
Mrs. Shuffle.
Yes. And student D.
I'd like to deny that open enrollment request for student D as presented in closed session.
Second.
Any discussion? Vote, please.
Mr. Wyledge,
Yes.
Mr. Hendricks,
Yes.
Mr. Stoffer,
Yes.
Mrs. Shuffle.
Yes. 9.04 employee request for other paid or unpaid leave.
Madam Chairwoman,
Mr. Hendricks.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the employee's request that presented in closed session.
Second.
Any discussion? Vote, please.
Mr. Hendricks,
Yes.
Mr. Stoffer,
Yes.
Mr. Wyledge,
Yes.
Mrs. Shuffle.
Yes. Items of interest, future board meetings. Our next regular board meeting will be January 10th. We are going to start at 5:30 because then we will go into closed session after our regular, or I guess during our regular board meeting, to discuss the applicants for the superintendent position. I believe that closes on January 2nd. I believe and so on the 10th, we will have Dr. Grenmeyer here, and we will discuss all the applications. Anything else? All right, can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Sorry.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? You can stay. I'm glad someone.